Ooh, hey, Sean from the Commander's Brew. This was a wild one. I mean, on paper, it sounds like a fine Boros deck. You know, you never draw cards, people don't expect you to do anything except wrath the board when things get scary. But this brew got out of hand pretty quickly. It was tough, but I think I pulled it off. Anyway, here's the deck tales. Here's Ferris. I didn't remember when he came out. I forgot about him immediately. But looking back at the commanders that came out earlier this year, ones I maybe forgot about, he came up and he seems pretty interesting, you know? Hexproof from monocolored. You do some things, you cast some multicolored spells, you make a bunch of 4/4s, protect your commander. Seems like a viable Boros thing to do, and, you know, like any good commander brewer, I tried to break him. Just for a second though, let's not think about how much better Oketra is at doing this exact thing. So we're being asked to cast multicolored spells. It doesn't sound too hard on paper, right? Boros Charm, one of the best in any Boros deck. I'm happy to run it. There's got to be enough of those out there to make a whole deck's worth, right? Out of 197 multicolored cards, there's got to be a few that do something good, right? And 197, you figure 40 lands, a bunch of mana rocks. We really only need like 30 or 40 good ones. So we can definitely cut out the ones on the bottom tier. I mean, there's some real stinkers out there. Truly. Flowstone Charger, it's from another time, so I'm not going to be mad at the designers. They were making Magic cards a little differently. Newer, though, is Fresh-Faced Recruit. Am I in a commander deck for once? Oh, I'm just being used as an example of a bad multicolor card? I'll take it. So there aren't as many good multicolored Boros cards as you might think. And as much as I'd love to cast Chief Jim Hopper and get a second 4/4 for it, it just seems kind of boring. A little plain, ordinary. So we gotta dig deeper. This takes us to the classic idea of a secret commander. We gotta hide the commander somewhere in the deck if we're gonna add a color because of the color identity rules. Unless you're playing some sort of homebrew variant where everybody's allowed to play as many colors as they want as long as you have a Boros commander. Call it Boros Rainbow. Actually sounds pretty good. And while we're at it, start the game with 30 life. Honestly, I love doing this. I think it makes a casual game of Commander a lot better. Try it next time. And we're no stranger to doing secret commanders. We did a secret Safi deck a while back. A few of them. Look through our catalog. Here's one card for you to help you get started. Any secret commander deck needs a couple of ways to tutor up the commander. Obviously, if we add black and go Mardu, there's ways to do it with cards like Grim Tutor. If we decide to go Naya by adding green instead, we can get access to things like Eldamri's Call, which is a multicolored card, so you'd think it would be perfect for this deck. And although it's absolutely fine as a way to get a secret commander out of there, as a multicolored card, our primary use is to use it to get General Ferris, so we're not going to be able to get the 4/4 off of it most of the time. But what if we could put a tutor right into the command zone? Atlapalani Nest Tender, if we go Naya, we've got a way to make it so as long as General Ferris is our only creature in the deck, all we got to do is make one egg, kill that egg somehow, have it sacrificed, maybe someone attacks into it, and it'll always find General Ferris. And then we go ham, baby. And we can run non-creature cards that make creature tokens as a way to do something in the early game, like Huatli Warrior Poet. Making those 3/3 dinos isn't a bad way to protect things while we're waiting to set everything up. The new problem, though, that we run into when we're doing this strategy is if you can't run creature cards, that cuts out a huge number of multicolored spells. So 3 colors isn't going to cut it anymore, at least not with this Atlapalani strategy. So we kind of got to go up to 5, and there just so happens to be the perfect commander for that. The Prismatic Bridge. It's the perfect commander to put in the command zone when you want to do some sort of one creature shenanigans, one planeswalker even. It'll get you right to it as long as it can survive a turn. It's probably way more hated than an Atlapalani would be. I mean, what you gain in it being harder to destroy, you probably lose because your opponents will definitely want to take care of it, because it's hard to convince the table that you're not doing anything too crazy with it. Of course, the Prismatic Bridge is the back half of ESIKA, God of the Tree. That's the actual creature that's in your command zone, but it's double-faced. You're allowed to cast it as the enchantment. So the plan is cast Prismatic Bridge, Next turn, General Ferris appears on the battlefield, and then we just cast a ton of multicolored spells, make a bunch of 4/4s, and win the game that way, right? Sounds easy. This is the part where I actually kind of get excited about this deck plan. I mean, this is what Commander's all about. Having a crazy idea and then seeing if you can dig through the 20,000 cards that have been printed and find a way to make it work. And then you tune it to see if you can make it work well. While I was putting it together, I realized this is the Storm deck. Now, before I get to how this deck tried to get the better of me, let me tell you a little bit about Storm and the kind of key pieces that make a Storm deck work. I'll tell you what we're not going to do. We're not going to figure out a way to make infinite mana. There's lots of ways to make infinite mana, and frankly, I'm a bit uninterested in winning that way. I mean, if you're making infinite mana, why go through the extra trouble of making a bunch of 4/4 golems? Just cast a gigantic Comet Storm or something. So then in our case, the guts of a good Storm deck means being able to cast a lot of spells, so that means we need to cast them cheap, and being able to draw a lot of cards so that we have the spells to cast. Oh, and I should point out that in this Ferris deck, we're not a true Storm deck. General Ferris only cares when you cast multicolored spells. And although we've put our own restriction that we're not even going to cast creatures anymore, that does include instants and sorceries and a few enchantments. So when we're talking cheap spells, Manamorphose is the perfect example for it. It's a 2 mana value spell, but it ends up being mana neutral because you get it back. And it ends up being card neutral too because you get to draw a card with it. That's 1 storm count. Again, it's just a 4/4. It's not actually storming to any cards that say storm. But that's 1 for the storm count, and we're back to exactly where we started. I think Frantic Search is worth running, even if we don't get a 4/4 golem because of it. It is something that ends up being mana neutral, and we get to pitch a couple of lands in case we're just stockpiling them. In a storm turn, you obviously won't need to play more than 1 land, so we got to do something with them. And this could be a mana positive spell if we're running something like Is It Boilerworks? You know, those bounce lands that tap for 2, and trust me, we keep an eye on a budget around here, so we are running bounce lands. And the way we're going to keep this Storm engine running is with cards like Tome of the Guild Pact. It's perfect for this deck. Every time we cast one of our multicolored spells, we get to draw a card, keep things rolling. Whirlwind of Thought does something similar. Love having it. And if we're willing to put all our eggs in one basket, Song of Creation is actually incredible. We draw tons of cards with it, and the drawback to have to discard your hand at the end of the turn kind of doesn't matter if we're planning on winning. I want a quick moment of silence for Kiora Behemoth Beckoner. The Prismatic Bridge makes it so we're not allowed to run Planeswalkers because we don't want to hit this instead of General Ferris. Man, she'd be perfect for this deck. Ramping us by untapping a land, maybe one of those lands that tap for 2, and drawing us a card every time we make one of those 4/4 golems. Kiora, I would pour one out for you, but you wouldn't notice it in the sea. And the other way to make a good Storm deck tick is by getting more for less mana. That means cost reducers. Urza's Filter isn't actually as expensive as I had imagined. You know, you see an old border card with the word Urza in the name, you just assume it's going to cost a bunch of money, but no, this one's only about $5. The Immortal Sun, another way to make all of our spells 1 cheaper, in addition to a myriad of other effects, makes the 4/4s that much bigger too, so that helps. Jace's Sanctum is another enchantment that makes spells 1 cheaper, or I should say instants and sorceries get 1 cheaper. I don't love it because although most of our stuff is instants and sorceries, as I said before, we do have a few enchantments in the deck. And speaking of enchantments, we're talking haste enablers. Right, so we don't want to go through all this work and cast a ton of multicolored spells, make a huge army of 4/4s, and then have to pass the turn and hope that no one's got any way to deal with them before it gets back around to us. No, we want to win right now, so the best way to do that without a creature is using enchantments. Fires of Yavimaya is a great way to give your whole team haste, plus we can sack it and to get that last 2 points if it does come down to it. Not Rhythm of the Wild though. This one doesn't grant Riot to any token creatures. I always forget that. It's only non-token creatures, unfortunately. But shout out to Temur Ascendancy, MVP in the deck. For 3 mana, this enchantment gives all of our creatures haste, and that lucrative 4 power lets us draw a card every time a 4 power creature comes in. That's every time we cast a multicolored spell. Now, one of the inherent drawbacks of making spells cheaper by things like the Immortal Sun or Jace's Sanctum, things like that, is multicolored spells often don't have as much non-colored mana in their mana cost. Something like Is It Charm costs 2 mana and you can't reduce it. It's a red and it's a blue, and there's nothing that's going to change that. And we just simply can't afford to pay 2 per spell when we're trying to storm off. Even if we had 10 or 12 mana, that's 5 or 6 spells. That's not good enough. And much like that new card that your one pal won't stop talking about, we're going to go hybrid. This is how we're going to get the spells cheap enough. They're going to be multicolored spells, but we're going to get the cost down to 1. We're looking at instants and sorceries, and we've got a couple enchantments. There's actually a handful of instants and sorceries that start with a 1 mana value anyway. The best part is, a few of them actually do something. Safe Right Quest. 1 mana, tutor up a land, and it counts as a multicolor spell. That could be the land you play in your storm turn. Make Your Mark, another 1 mana value spell. Doesn't do a lot, but it makes a 4/4 and gives another 1/1/0. Fossil Find for a single mana could be a form of card draw. Ideally, you get one of your spells back that's multicolored, so that could be a huge bonus. Maybe it whiffs, but we get that 4/4 either way. And we are forced to run a few 1 mana spells that do almost literally nothing. Dream Salvage, I mean, unless something good happened, you probably aren't drawing any cards from it. Bioshift is a card that doesn't really do anything either because we're not building towards it. So yeah, they're just a couple 4/4s. We're cut off from a couple of 1 mana value spells that are hybrid that just sometimes are uncastable. Guttural Response. There shouldn't be a spell on the stack while we're doing this, and although it would be cheeky to hold this in the off chance someone tries to counter something you're doing, but I just don't think this is a likely option. So now with our reducers, we can make the 2 mana ones with that single hybrid mana actually cost 1. Back to our pal Manamorphose. It's the best in a storm deck and even better in this one. Scarsdale Ritual is actual draw for the small price of moving a -1/-1 counter on one of your creatures. And Inside Out, again, I'll switch the power and toughness of a 4/4 to draw a card. Fine by me. Ooh, and more recently we got Cram Session. This one's not bad. I know that you can't have any sideboards, so we don't get to put lessons and learns and that kind of thing going on, but we do get to do the rummage effect, which I keep forgetting about. And we did need to dip into the 3 mana value hybrid spells. Hopefully we can make them cost down to 1 though, because they always have 2 and that single hybrid color. Snake Form doesn't do a lot functionally, but it does help us draw a card. Unnerving Assault, we only get to pay 1 for it, ideally, so it better be red, so we get the whole team +1/+0. I'll take it. And special shout out to Heroic Reinforcements. I know that that's not a hybrid spell, but getting 2 more 1/1s and giving the whole team +1/+0 is big game, and if you don't have another haste enabler, this could act as that. So this might work. I mean, you'd have to be in a really low-powered pod. You'd have to be playing with people who also want to do their own maniacal machines and aren't that interested in stopping you from doing yours because, quite frankly, we're not running any protection to speak of. There's just no room. Between haste enablers, things that make things cheaper, and all the actual cantrippy multicolored spells to begin with, we just don't have the room for it. Ooh, but it would be an impressive achievement to pull off, wouldn't it? So what kind of deck builder are you anyway? Is this the sort of deck that you find interesting? I mean, by now you'll know if this is something that excites you to reach for the stars and achieve the impossible, or if you're just thinking, oh, this is ridiculous, why would I ever want to spend my time doing this? I do love this sort of thing, but unfortunately, this deck is hungry for money, and it's just so tricky to pull off that even at this low power level, I think you just don't want to build this budget. So is this a budget deck after all? I don't know. I mean, all the multicolored spells, all those hybrid ones, we got 31 of them, and each one of them's 25 cents, a gumball. Except for Manamorphose, that one's $5 because real Storm decks want it. And Cauldron Haze, of all things, is $1.50. It's a good card, but it doesn't work on tokens, which all of our creatures except General Ferris are, so I might as well swap that out for another hybrid card that literally does nothing. The cost reducers aren't a big cost to the deck either, for the most part. they are a little bit of an awkward category because we have plenty of 1 mana value spells that can't be reduced, and out of the other hybrid ones, a lot of them are 1 and a hybrid, so reducing by more than 1 is a little bit redundant unless we have one of our 3 mana spells. And the Immortal Sun, it's great, but it ain't cheap. It's like $30 these days. I haven't mentioned it yet, but I know you're thinking about it. This is a 5-color deck, so the mana requirements would already be tricky, but with these hybrid mana cards, truly, it's confusing to think about like what mana you need to spend and when. We almost have to have our Chromatic Lantern out to just make any sense of things. And that card's $10. And I'm not even talking about the lands themselves. If you don't want to play the game a turn behind, you got to go with shocks and fetches or original duels if you have them. And I'm not even going to mention how useful Concordant Crossroads would be at giving your whole team haste. That's a $50 price tag. And if we didn't care about budget, of course we'd be running Parallel Lives or Anointed Procession, which are running like $45 and $40 respectively these days. Yikes. This is without a doubt the loosest, most jankiest brew I've ever done on this show. And it almost feels like you need to put the money into the deck just to make sure it could do its thing. I mean, let's be honest, nobody is good at rating their deck on the power scale. And if you roll up to a table and say that this is a 4 at best, and you drop the Prismatic Bridge and your first turn is a shock and a fetch, they're going to think you're a liar and nothing you can do will convince them otherwise. Ultimately, though, I am pretty proud of this brew I put together. It has a goal, and it makes the goal, even if it wants to be like $1,000 deck to do so. I mean, if you want to see the full list that I have, check the TCGPlayer link, but I'm going to warn you, it ain't cheap. But as always, I couldn't put something like this together, especially not such a wild brew, without the help from the members of our Discord. Special shout out to Dylan PH, Papa Dio, Groove Chicken, Chiefy, and Knucklebooper for helping me out with this one. I play Commander to do fun things, right? It's about the journey, not the destination. Same is true when I build decks too, and I hope you've had fun coming along this deck brewing journey with me. And if you're not that kind of deck brewer, if you're the type of player who likes to get things done efficiently and effectively, Docent of Perfection. It's a mono blue creature. Every time you cast a spell, you're not making a 4/4 golem. I mean, once this thing flips, you're effectively making 3/2s with flying, which is arguably better at getting through than an army of 4/4s. Less damage, but you got that evasion. And it's in a color that was made for cantripping. No extra work needed, and it works with any instant or sorcery. So I don't know, maybe you make a couple of tokens with something like a dragon fodder, and then we also have a creatureless deck here, so somehow we hit a polymorph effect that goes through the whole deck, and it will definitely hit that Docent of Perfection. And at the helm, why don't we put Adeliz the Cinderwind? Now, since all we're pumping out are wizards, they're also getting +1/+0 every time we cast a spell. So like, are they 3/2 flyers, or are they 7/2 flyers? Are they 12/2 flyers? We don't even need to do as much to get it done. 2 decks, both with the same plan. One of them, you have to jump through about 1,000 hoops with as many dollars to make it work. And the other one's just a regular red-blue cantrippy kind of deck. I mean, there's one of these two that I've never seen before. So if that's interesting to you, I think you know which one I'd go with. Anyway, that's the episode. I hope you enjoyed the journey, and let me know which kind of deck you prefer. These complicated Rube Goldberg machines or the ones that get the job done. See you next time.